how do you think marketers should think about comparing or combining attribution surveys with platform-specific data and basic to complicated multi-touch attribution?
Yeah, it comes down to cadence. Like what you're always looking for is signal, essentially. Like, is this working or is this not? If you were to just run MMM, well, you're waiting for signal like every 6 months or every month, maybe. But if you're just relying on that methodology, you're waiting a long time. If you're totally bought in on like incrementality, which is causal, I think it's a great way to measure performance. Like you're now limited to where you can actually do holdouts and run these types of experiments. So I think that every measurement and like arguably every channel requires a different makeup. As the distribution of channels gets wider, like as you start advertising on more channels, you need more methods to gut check the holistic mix.
Hi, and welcome to Growth Talks, where we dive into the world of marketing and growth with today's top industry leaders. I'm Krystina Rubino, the general manager of the offline practice of Right Side Up, and your host. Today, I'm joined by Matt Bahr, the co-founder of Fairing, which is a platform that helps brand marketers make smarter decisions across measurement, attribution, and customer insights. I've had the privilege of advising Fairing, so I've seen firsthand how deeply Matt and his team understand the challenges that brands face and the tools that they actually need. And previously, Matt worked in marketing for years. He served as a director of e-commerce and digital at Master and Dynamic, where he led global e-commerce expansion, digital marketing, and logistics. So Matt, thank you for joining me, and it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to get deep into it with you.
Absolutely. So we can start, well, more towards the beginning, but I think I'm always interested in people's journeys to founding MarTech companies, because often it's very much rooted in like, I've had X experience, so I wanted to develop Y thing. You've been working in e-commerce and marketing for nearly 15 years now. And prior to starting Fairing, you joined Master and Dynamic ahead of its official product launch. So out of curiosity, because not everybody has the opportunity to step into a pre-launch brand, how did you approach go-to-market strategy in a category that was already very dominated by legacy players like Bose and Sony?
Yeah, so at Master and Dynamic, I was the first operating employee there, hired after the kind of head of brand and head of design. So the brand was the most important thing. So we were launching into a very crowded category. Beats was on an incredible trajectory. And we were selling a $400 headphone, was our marquee hero product. So pre-launch and into post-launch, like I learned a lot about brand and the process in which to sell a luxury good. So that was a lot of what we were leaning on. The strategy on the go-to-market side was really baked in kind of a lot of PR initially. It was like, how do we catapult ourselves a few years into the ecosystem, like within a few months? So we definitely heavily, and this is, again, we launched on May, I think it was May 8th of 2014, almost a decade ago, where go-to-market strategy was a little bit differently. Meta's like ad manager was out. Like there was definitely some spending there. From a channel perspective, it was really Meta and Google were our digital channels we were focused on. But we had almost like comparable budget on the PR side of things. It was like, how do we tell the story of Master and Dynamic was the most important thing. Previous to that, had a small consulting business with a very senior e-com operator for 2.5, 3 years, which is very tactical. We were looking at GA, Google Analytics dashboards all day. And then I go to Master and Dynamic and I am tasked with e-com holistically. It's like, what platform are we going to use? What is the initial go-to-market strategy? And then I got this beautiful injection of brand strategy really early on. And that initial early team at Master and Dynamic was bar none some of the best operators in the space. Head of product is now head of audio at Meta, at Oculus. Like Andrew, who built that brand, now has, I think, his own consultancy. So I was also surrounded by some truly incredible people really early on in that business.
Yeah, I think it's funny to hear you say, like, to emphasize brand. A topic that keeps coming up on this show is just how seemingly divorced brand and growth are. But then in reality, I think a lot more people are starting to come to the realization that without a strong brand platform, growth becomes really challenging, especially like 2014, you could still break Meta in the best possible way, right? You could still break Google in the best possible way. But in 2025, it's like it's the strategy is no longer direct to Facebook. It's just not. It can't be, right? So I like to hear, even back then, you guys were, to hear that a launch brand, especially a startup, is committed to spending almost as much on PR and like branding initiatives as they are on digital media is a little rare, but also makes total sense to me from a luxury perspective. Like, it just goes to show you, like, right size the tactics and channel spend to the particular category or like corner of the category you find yourself in.
Yeah. And it's interesting now, fast forward to 2025. I read something last week where like PR might start to be a bigger and bigger strategy once again, just because it's creating content for these LLMs to train off of, which I thought was quite funny. It's like, if you were leading into PR, maybe you shouldn't have 2 years ago, it might end up actually being a good mistake, or maybe you were looking at a crystal ball and doing it purposely. But yeah, it seems like that type of content may be back in.
It's funny. I have also been just as I haven't worked in paid search and organic search in like 9 years regularly at this point, 5 years, like somewhat. That's a lot of my background is digital media, communications planning. But one thing that I'm really keeping an eye on is how SEO is going to change with LLMs, and just to see how the journey has changed. It's shocking me how much consumers are starting to use these platforms to make purchasing decisions. And it could be really interesting how they show up in attribution as a result, because these are like very closed platforms and they're also like a little bit behind Google. So it's not, or heavily monetized as Google. They're not like the connections aren't quite as defined and finite. So attribution becomes harder. But I digress. We'll get into that a little bit later. But one more question from a direct to consumer e-commerce perspective. You got to build an e-commerce engine from the ground up at Master & Dynamics. So what were some of the biggest lessons you learned, especially when it came to digital marketing and like early customer acquisition?
I had a solid framework going into that role, just given like the 2 or 3 years of consulting that definitely helped. The go-to-market strategy, given the high AOV product, was really just about lead generation. We weren't totally thinking of it in like the B2B sense of like, we need to really focus on micro conversions and capture leads and take them through a funnel. But that was very similar to what we were doing. So that was like our meta campaigns for the most part were optimized on email capture on site than they were purchase. And just because we were getting so much more signal for that than convincing someone to buy a $400 product. So that was really the early strategies that we were definitely leaning into. Looking back, I think at the time we were still on MailChimp. So Klaviyo, looking back, I'm like, why weren't we there? Like Klaviyo was around for a year or two before then. So I think...
Yeah, but the adoption wasn't as fast. Like MailChimp had a stranglehold on early growth brands for like a good 5-6 years. It was a real thing.
And email was like it was part of the strategy, but it's definitely not as big as like the retention strategy that it is today. And I think a lot of that is due to Klaviyo's success and the product they've built.
Oh, yeah.
So it is funny looking back. It's really fortunate in that role in Master Dynamic because we were very much augmenting our strategy with consultants during the whole thing. So after we launched, we're like, we need to really dive into SEO. So we went and hired a great SEO agency, and they went really deep into like screen size on retina screens. Like I think that's where we ended like 8 weeks into it. It was like, okay, I think we're going a little bit too far. We hired a really good agency on the BI side, and we were trying to build the best reporting possible and how do we automate and all those things. So a lot of the things that we were able to execute on the go-to-market side of things early on, we're definitely augmented, but looking at what the different stacks are. It's like we have email, we have lead gen through email. How do we do that through paid? We have SEO, that's a channel. How do we do that? And then we started just like checking each box off one by one. So we definitely learned a ton early on at that org as far as what works and what doesn't. I think the hardest problem is with high AOV products. The consideration window is so long that you need a very holistic,
big time,
like force a direct response strategy into a product like that. And that's why things like brand are so important. And yeah, I think anyone who's selling a high AOV product that is discretionary spend, like kudos as you figure that out, because it is probably one of the hardest problems to do.
Yeah. It's when it's a want and not a need. And also it's not a want that you're like, yeah, I'll spend X amount of money on Y dumb thing that's going to bring me joy in this moment, cupcakes or whatever other, I don't know. I talk to D2C all the time and I'm like, oh, barrier to entry here really low. And then you talk to somebody who's selling like a mattress or selling very expensive, very high quality headphones. And you're like, oh, you're going to take a minute. And then you have to compound like the consumer's journey to purchase with, the lead time from a channel attribution perspective, where it's like, well, it actually takes a minute for channels to accumulate reach and frequency. Like I haven't talked as much about CUME as a concept as I have in the last like 2-3 years, because more marketers are coming around to it. And I'm like, the thing you're talking about is what is called in broadcast CUME, or like accumulation of reach and frequency. So it is interesting to see, like, even like PR, these tactics that are, or definitions that are older school or just not as embraced by the growth audience, just start to be like embraced by a newer generation of marketers. Or I should say like a different discipline of marketers, because it's the same generation, but it's just like different discipline.
Even personas.
Yeah, exactly.
I always go back to that. Like it's definitely coming back into the strategic toolkit of going pretty deep into like your personas. But I think during that like high growth period of spend, it was more of like, how do I put more money into meta, and less of like, how do I understand the different segments of customers I have? And I think part of it, I think a question for you is like, did brands need to go deep into personas and all the strategic stuff if they were getting a good return on meta? Like maybe if they did, they would have gotten an even better return. But at the time, like
it was direct to Facebook for a minute. Like I say this all the time, but like, when I came into like the very growthy, languagey, San Francisco Bay Area based, that's part of tech. I came into it around 2016. I remember being like a year or two in, just being like, okay, so if you have a sans serif font and a website and a product with like the barest hint of product market fit, you could probably scale Facebook to 500 a month profitably. And it's not that hard. Fast forward almost 10 years, and it's like you have to develop a real brand strategy. There is too much competition in most categories where D2C especially operates, where if you don't have a distinct brand identity and a reason for being and value that you're adding to the mix, unless you have some ungodly marketing spend or your influencer founded and you're getting crap ton of, free impressions that way, short of like one of those like tiny little cheats or hacks that might happen, you actually have to go back to the discipline of marketing and do the damn thing. Like it's a totally different thing. And, actually I can swing it around to Farron here, because so you were very much like in-house on the marketing side of things. At a certain point, clearly you found a gap in capability from a measurement perspective when it comes to post-purchase surveys, but maybe just globally, that led you to start Farron. And you've introduced a lot of different marketing measurement frameworks over the years, like maturity ladders, and just how to align measurement strategy with a company stage of growth. So like I was teasing Matt before this, guys, that I was like, we're not going to turn this into an infomercial, but Matt has a really interesting view of marketing attribution and talks to a ton of founders and marketers often. So I'm just curious, like when you were making the decision to start Farron, what were the problems that you were like, man, I don't see anybody solving it this way, so I've got to take a crack at doing this? Yeah.
So I don't even know if you know this part of the story. That gap was pre-Farron, and we actually had a different startup. So by the end of my time at Master and Dynamic, I was running all paid media, all things e-commerce and logistics. Small company, wore a lot of hats.
I love a comma. I love like HR, comma talent, comma legal, comma ops.
Yeah. Everything from finished goods on a boat. I was leading that. And at the time, this is again 2015, 2016. And I'll do this fast. But at the time, Uber Rush and Postmates had same-day delivery APIs. And at Master and Dynamic, we got approached by one of them, and we ended up being the first company or second company, first after Everlane in New York, to ship same day using Postmates APIs. I thought it was the coolest thing on the planet. For obvious reasons, you go to masterdynamic.com, you click a button, you get some headphones. Like no need to go to the store. So I became enamored with that. We ended up like building something with Wonder Sauce, who was like the development agency we worked with. Shout out to John over there. And I left Master Dynamic really focused on solving a problem in the same day delivery space. I left in June. I met Kurt, my current co-founder, in probably September, late August, and started off as a marketplace for products available for same day because I was like, there's a demand issue. Like, how do we solve the top of funnel demand? We have these APIs. How do we let customers discover them? We eventually, like 6 months in, moved into a B2B SaaS where it's like, okay, like we're talking to enough people and the issue isn't necessarily demand. They can't operationalize this, but they want to. So we did that for about a year and a half. And I think we got to about 5K in MRR, but every dollar, we had to fight so much for it. It was not an easy 5K. And the real truth of it is half of that revenue was like arguably consultative revenue because they were just using me and not actually shipping stuff same day.
Yeah, they wanted your brain.
One of those customers was called Kara Sport. Aaron still runs a company here in New York. They were doing a ton of gifting and we were just chatting one day and he was like, we're doing all this gifting. I don't know how much it was, $10,000 a week or something, like considerable amount for their size. And he's like, no one's using promo codes or the links. It's clearly not working. We're going to turn it off. But he's like, look at Instagram. Everyone's posting about it. My initial thought was like, well, maybe they're not using the promo code. So I suggested to Aaron I like found an app at the time that allowed you to add scripts to your thank you page on Shopify because you couldn't do that natively, or maybe only on Shopify Plus. And we embedded a Google form into their thank you page. So where I'm getting to is like the founding of Fairing was not some like huge revelation. The answer was right in front of me. So he implemented this Google form. And then 3 or 4 months later, he like didn't bring it up. And then he's like, oh, by the way, I check that thing every day, but people keep saying they saw me at an event and it's not attached to the order. Like it's just living in an iframe. So I'm getting all this answers to the question, how did you hear about Kara? But I don't know what order they're attached to. So that was really the catalyst of the same day delivery stuff. Wasn't like we were still seeking product market fit. And then so we already knew how to like build applications within this commerce Shopify ecosystem. And Aaron came to me, your solution solved this problem with like a but ... So that was really the catalyst. When we built V1 of Fairing, it took about 3 weeks. And if you asked me, like, what are you guys doing? We're building this app that hopefully will generate a couple $1,000s a month so that we could go buy dinner and keep working on the same day delivery stuff. We launched May 8th, which I think is the same date Master Dynamic launched, funny enough. And in May alone, we were on about 100,000 orders. Asking mainly the question, how did you hear about us, for a few really large brands. So frankly, it took a few more months of like, it probably went to 200,000 or 300,000 after that before I was like, okay, we should drop everything and focus on this. So that was really the founding story of Fairing. It was suggesting a solution to a problem without trying to find a company. Obviously, this is probably how the best ideas most often get created with serendipity, but that's really all it was. And we might get into this, but like we were very much building a great company, and then iOS 14 happened, and it seemed like the problem in the space that we were living in grew exponentially.
Yeah. And I think that actually, first of all, I love that detour so much because I feel like people in growth often realize this, but people generally don't realize how many failed startups or abandoned startups lead to the actual nugget of the gem. Like, that becomes a company. I know so many founders that I respect and love. And it's like, oh, I failed 2 other times and blah, blah, blah. Or we thought we were going to build this. And then it's like, but we actually wound up building that and people wanted that more than this. So we wound up doing the thing. I love that you sought to solve this in a way that like, it's a pretty complicated marketing problem, to be clear, but it's an elegant solution. But there's teams that are very lean, right, that have these marketing problems and they have limited budgets and data. Why are attribution surveys such a powerful tool for them? Because I have been a long time proponent of them, but I also came into this about almost 10 years ago. And when I saw that we were using surveys for attribution, I was at a small agency at the time. I laughed because I was digital girl from Publicis and they're like, yeah, we use these surveys. And I'm like, what do you mean you use surveys? And it's like, no, like the moment right after conversion is such a valuable time to ask for feedback. So my question to you is why are surveys such a powerful tool? Why is it such a valuable time to ask for feedback?
Yeah, I think your latter point's the most important thing. So a lot of call it like re-education, or maybe it's a framing problem, is when marketers and operators think of surveys, they think of SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics and email-based surveys where they're used to getting like a 1% to 3% completion rate if they're lucky. If we think about like a 30, 35% open rate to actually filling those things out. So the framing of research or surveys, has always been in this research corner where you run it quarterly. So if you're doing it right, a lot of work goes into it, because once you send this survey blast, there's no coming back from it. It's sent to 100,000 people. Or moving the surface from email, it's just arguably the core place where brands were capturing this and still are today, to in moment, does a few things. The most important is we already have the consumer's attention. So we don't have to create or calculate kind of that flow of email to open rate to click. So what that does is dramatically changes the kind of data from being extremely sample based to highly predictable and extrapolated out. Because a good example is our e-commerce brands who aren't on Shopify, Thorn and 8 Sleep, like their completion rates for their post-purchase attribution surveys are upwards of 70 to 80%. And it is because we have those consumers' attention. And when the data is that high, like our big positioning push that we're trying to make and for the market to understand is the survey response becomes very analogous to a click or a pixel firing. It's very similar. So I have this stream of data that's essentially just like opening up Google Analytics. I could see it change every hour into something that you can then make real-time decisions on. So that is the big push. Like we still work with brands who are like, we have this previously, we sent it via email. It goes out after our NPS survey, 30 days post-purchase. And there's a whole recency bias and other things that we can get into. Like you want to be asking, especially attribution questions, like as close to the purchase as humanly possible to get the most accurate data. So that's really the whole story around like in moment versus email. We almost don't like to compare them. Like we just closed a brand last week who's on Qualtrics, and I'm like, still use Qualtrics. Qualtrics is a great solution for email-based.
It's a different thing.
Yes. But for your growth team, like you need a solution that is built for this specific problem, because you're allocating, in this case, tens of millions of dollars a month, and you need something that's very purpose-built.
Yeah. And I also often tell people, because I write hard for survey attribution, and I have long before I was ever involved with fairing or even aware of fairing. Because for me, part of the reason that I left digital marketing behind and started to focus on offline is that I started finding myself looking at results with more and more of an incredulous eye every week. And when viewability started gaining prominence in display as a metric, especially from a transaction perspective, and I started being like, I don't think these ads are as impactful as this survey or brand lift study is coming back and telling us they are. And attribution's still really messy. And for me, I naturally have always gravitated towards pixel-based attribution or some facsimile of it, because it's often very analogous to the view-through conversion rates the view-through conversion activity, that is so easy to calculate in Facebook and Google. For me, it's not an either or thing. I trust no source of attribution blindly or completely. I don't. Because for me, if you have attribution surveys that are hugely helpful, you also have single channel source attribution, right? And then you also have MMM and MTA. You have the most basic forms of it, but then you have like the off the shelf $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year solutions. There's so much complexity in the attribution mix that my rallying cry for years has been overlapping and redundant attribution. Because the way that I use surveys most often is to triangulate what other channels are telling me. Because there's this thing with single source attribution where if you start adding all of your single sources together, you wind up getting to 120% of overall conversions. Yeah, exactly. And you're like, that's weird. I only know that I had 100 sales last month and my single channel attribution is telling me I have 280. What the hell? So a long way to get there, but how do you think marketers should think about comparing or combining attribution surveys with platform specific data and basic to complicated multi-touch attribution?
Yeah, it comes down to cadence. What you're always looking for is signal, essentially. Like, is this working or is this not? If you were to just run MMM, it's like, well, you're waiting for signal like every 6 months or every month, maybe. Like, I think it's still up in the air. It's like how accurate some of these short window MMMs are. But if you're just relying on that methodology, you're waiting a long time. If you're totally bought in on like incrementality, which is causal. I think it's a great way to measure performance. Like you're now limited to where you can actually do holdouts and run these types of experiments. So I think that every measurement and like arguably every channel requires a different makeup. As the distribution of channels gets wider, like as you start advertising on more channels, you need more methods to gut check the holistic mix. So if you're a brand just spending on Meta, you arguably don't need a survey. You could probably rely just on Meta's reporting. Like you could throw regression on your spend and your revenue. This is mainly what's driving this. Arguably a survey would catch like influencer type stuff if you're getting a lot of earned media on that side. But if you're a product, you don't need a very complicated mix. But as you start to introduce audio or TV or other channels, you need a way to look at the whole picture. And MMM's a great way to do that. It's a tried and true methodology that's been around for 70 years. But again, smaller brands can't necessarily do that. The window is quite large. So like, how do I get early signal? On the MTA side, there's this huge push toward causality and incrementality. Like arguably a really good marketer could probably get pretty far with MTA. I like almost shouldn't say that because it provides like really good signal from like the creative and ad unit side. And arguably if you optimized for that, then everything else would follow. So there's obviously pluses and minuses, and you should be looking at all these things and always looking at it more holistically and like where in the stack is each methodology and which channel is. Like when we started working together, you were looking at promo codes and landing pages and survey responses and building a triangulation methodology across those things. Because all you were trying to do is like, is this driving new customers or not? How do we solve for that problem?
Yeah. It's for me, regardless of where a channel sits in the growth mix, for me, if the primary goal of most of your marketing is growth, then that should be a question that you can answer for each channel. And the source data might be kind of like wonky and shitty from some of the channels, but that's why not everybody does this for a living, because it can be really challenging to figure out. But guess what? That's your problem to figure out. I often think that I couldn't agree more in terms of like when your marketing mix is not that complicated, don't overcomplicate your measurement. Just don't. Like single channel source attribution on Google, if a majority of your search is paid search, or rather single source attribution from Google, if a majority of your spend is paid search, you're probably okay. Google spent just a couple of bucks on their technology, right? Like you're talking about some of the brightest minds in the world that have like figured out how to properly attribute ad spend because that's their main source of monetization. I'm going to go ahead and say you can trust them in that instance. You know, of course, the bias is always like, oh my God, Google thinks I should spend more money, you guys. So I still like having a gut check just as a marketer. But there is like when your marketing mix is less complicated, your attribution stack can be less complicated. When your marketing attribution or when your marketing channel mix gets more complicated, guess what? Your attribution methodology has to follow suit. Otherwise, you're going to be one of those marketers that's still using last click in 2025, and you're going to make me really sad.
Yeah. So I think on that, do you think marketers on the larger end of that, my whole argument is most marketers who are spending considerable money on multiple channels are actually not complicating, are not thinking about it in a complex way. And a lot of them are relying on last click. Like they're undercomplicating what they should be, like at the 20 million in revenue mark. And that's a hard problem for people to bite because it requires a big investment. Like we still talk to brands all the time that rely on last click, like large, well-known brands that are relying on last click who spend heavily into influencers, just like you are. Like your media mix is probably 50% off. So I think there's definitely a lot of hesitation. And one of the things that we've been trying to communicate is there's this concept of like a measurement stack. And like, I think what percentage of your total spend is definitely up for debate, but it depends on where your media is. It depends on how you're able to understand the information you're getting. And I think products like Fairing and like consultants in this space are, if they're doing a good job, they're definitely worth their dollar just because they're like the output of that is quite large if you're able to recalibrate everything.
Well, that's the thing. Exactly. If you can recalibrate spend when somebody's investing $3 or $4 or $5 million a month in media, in marketing and paid marketing spend, it's like, well, if you need to spend a portion of money on some sort of a solution, whether it's a consultant, an outside party, an agency, greenlighting something in the development, prioritization that you're like, we don't really have time and resources for this, but we're going to bulk up the team, hire some temporary resources and like get the shit done. Right. For me, if you can make your marketing spend more efficient by even 10% and you're scaled enough, very rarely will you need to spend up to that to gain that kind of efficiency. One of the common pushbacks I hear is, do I have to enable pixel-based attribution for podcasts? 2 years ago, you told me I didn't need to, Krystina. And I'm like, well, 2 years ago, nobody accepted the technology. And I wasn't using it as my primary source of attribution. But guess what? Publishers started accepting it and it became more relevant. And now it's very, very actionable data. So I think as a marketer, just have to get much more acquainted with what is going on in the attribution space and stay on top of it, which like not that marketers need something else to stay on top of, but like, it's evolve or die in some ways. Like the media mix, the channel mix is not going to get any less complicated. Short of another platform rising to prominence the way Meta and even TikTok did, until that happens, because it will, something will happen, right? At a certain point in the future. We don't use MySpace anymore. So like something will happen at some point in the future. But until that, you're not going to concentrate a vast majority of your marketing spend on one channel. Or if you are, there's already ways that we know that Meta or Google can be very overcompensated for, or rather undercompensated. I'm sorry, but paid search is an amazing way to pull in demand that you're creating with other channels and be able to close that loop where other channels that are harder to measure, you know, you might be like, oh, well, how am I going to get people to close the loop? And it's like, well, they're going to search for it because it's a natural human behavior. We could probably do this for another 3 hours, but I usually take a break about halfway through the interview. We do a quick little game and then we get into the rest of it. So thank you, by the way, for going over a little bit here, but let's get into our game. So we do a game called the A/B test, and it is the least scientific A/B test that I hope any of us ever run. I'm just going to ask you one or the other, and some will be work related, some will be silly and funsies. And yeah, you have to pick one. You only get one. It depends. Because I get from all marketers all the time, they're like, it depends. I'm like, you get one. You cannot say it depends for every question. Okay, let's start with work related. Email or Slack?
Slack.
I know, me too. I know it's not everybody's love language, but I just done too much.
My brain
email.
is always going like 100 miles an hour, so it like matches that speed.
I have a theory that for those of us who grew up on instant messenger platforms, especially, like, I'm like, Slack is Worksey's AOL Instant Messenger. Like, no shit, I'm addicted to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, like, I learned how to do HTML coding on, like, MySpace. Like, literally, the second MySpace mention, by the way, in an interview. It might be a record in 2025. Startup or big brand?
Startup.
Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
I like to say there's not a right answer, but I'll just move on.
I have a dog. I have to choose.
Same. Like, I'm surprised. Well, I have the door closed, but otherwise he would be all up in here. Organic or paid media?
Organic.
I do love when people think organic is free. I'm like, no, that wasn't the question. It do cost money to make it happen. Yeah. Summer or winter?
Winter.
Road
the real
trip
answer is like
love-
fall or spring, but we're not going to get there. Yeah.
That's fair. I will allow that. Well, actually, then fall or spring?
Fall. Fall in New York is the best place ever.
We got married in October. And at the time I was like, I can't believe I'm getting married in Q4 because that's how my brain works.
Yep.
But it's the most delicious time of the year there. It's like, yeah, those are like the days you remember. Yeah. Would you rather go on a road trip or take a luxury vacation? I'm not going to judge you.
Road trip.
Ooh, okay.
That's where my brain went first, but
I like it. Yeah. I mean, I'm not kicking either out. Like, I'll take them both.
I'll take both. You know? Yeah. I do like a good
that
road
can be your
there.
It depends.
Yeah.
Bootstrap or VC funding?
VC funding.
I'm curious as to why. You don't have to answer, but
you're rewarded for ambition over frugality, I'd say.
I love that.
Yeah, I think there's certain businesses that shouldn't be VC backed, so that like ignoring all of those things, like capital allows you to take bigger risks and place bigger bets, which is more fun.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of businesses that shouldn't be VC backed, but there's a lot of businesses that can't be bootstrapped Like,
yeah. Oh, true. Yeah. Very capital efficient or capital intensive businesses. They need capital.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I'll do one more fun one. Would you rather swap lives for a day with your favorite actor or a historical figure?
Historical figure.
Oh, anybody come to mind?
Ben Franklin.
That's so cool.
I listened to his book maybe last year, and I don't know. I feel like I make Ben Franklin references all the time to my wife, who does not entertain that. But yeah.
I was going to say she must love that. I love that for her.
Our front door code, we have like a smart lock on it, and I'm like, oh, let's use Ben Franklin's birthday. And she's like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I'm like, all you have to remember is his birthday. You could go look it up if you need to. Like, I know it off the top of my head. So it's not Ben Franklin's birthday, but I wish it was.
You're like, I did not win this. I do love, there is no one on this earth who can read you for filth the way that like your partner can. Yeah. They're just like, oh, that nice idea you had, that's dumb. And you're just like, nah, it's kind of dumb. All right, well.
Like, I still think it's awesome.
I think it's awesome. You're wrong, but like, okay, I love you, so I guess we'll do it your way. My husband doesn't listen to this, thankfully, because like it would be the most boring thing to him. But occasionally he'll hear me say things in here, and he's just like, "Why do you do that?" I'm like, "I don't know, bro." Like,
yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's my favorite thing actually is when you do like co-working with friends. I've been in some situations with you and I didn't even know you had that professional side to you. Like that is, who is she? I've never met her before. I've taken care of her on the way home from the bar, but like I ain't never met that girl.
My wife's a investment banker and she sounds different on call. Not like that different, but like she's way more professional on work calls than as you should be, but like to the extreme.
You're like, who is she? Is that the lady?
Those are words you don't use around me. Yeah.
I mean, I actually kind of wish she would just start being like, listen, Matt, I've looked over our expenses and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Really, it's making some investments here that I find questionable. Okay, well, that was fun. And that is part of why we do it. Because like eventually when we get so zoomed into a topic, you're like, okay, I got to breathe for a second. But we did kind of, the last closing topic that I have for you, and we did kind of get into it a little bit just because I feel like when you talk about attribution, it just naturally comes up where it's like, we're in an era where content is distributed across a handful of platforms. And a lot of these platforms are closed platforms. Some of them are open, but you got everything from Spotify and YouTube to TikTok, Instagram, not to mention broadcast channels, not to mention first-party websites. The media landscape is so complex. And when we look at how marketers measure success across these channels, we talked a little bit about this, but what gets lost when we apply last-click thinking to channels that lack a measurable direct action, where there is no click to last click?
Yeah, I think, what happens is those channels don't get the credit that they deserve. I think that's obviously the obvious answer there. The bigger thing that we see is the blind spots aren't even as known or discussed. Like the time to value with attribution surveys, fairing, or if you just have a homegrown one or anything, is so quick because you're able to see a totally different view of the world that you probably maybe knew existed, but there might not have been like immense excitement about it because you didn't really know what the mix would be or anything. So that's the biggest thing that we see when brands start to use us. And like one of the things that we do in fairing is we compare the survey data to last click, because we want to make that story as like emotional, where it's like, oh, this is what I was looking at in Google Analytics or in platform. And it's like, this is what the customer says. And what that then does is create a really good story, like what that path to purchase looks like without overcomplicating it. So if we had MTA in the sense that we were capturing every click, it's like, okay, this path to purchase is stochastic at best. It seems very random. How do I action on this? But when we look at what the customer says compared to what the last click says, it's like, okay, they heard about us on a podcast or they saw us on connected TV. And then what's the last click? It's our branded search campaign. And this kind of complex world of, okay, we need to move out of last click. We need to do we need to spend $1 million on an MMM? What is this? Like, it really starts to open up. And it's like a really good stepping stone in kind of creating a more complex but accurate measurement system within your org. So yeah, those are our biggest learnings. Like the other thing is like you can't scale at, like maybe you could scale last click. Like most last click today is like direct or branded search or channels that you can't just keep dumping money in. So that's also the reason where you're like starting to hit some diminishing returns or like availability to spend, just because it's like how much more money can we put into it's like scale email. It's, well, I need to get more emails. It's like, well, where are they coming from?
Yeah. Scale brand search, Matt. And you're like, yes, but there is no more. Like, unlike Lindsay Lohan and Mean Girls, the limit does exist. Like, nobody is waking up in the morning and being, you know what? I really need an off-the-shelf survey attribution product. I think I'm just going to Google fairing. And it's like, no, that's not how this works. Yeah. And it's funny, too, because that I do remember actually in paid search just being really frustrated anytime anybody would ask me the question, how do I get more brand search? And it's like, well, more people need to search for your brand. Okay. You need to generate demand. Search is a demand capturing platform.
Yeah.
Yes, obviously you can do some prospecting on paid search for people in market and all of that. But at the core of it, if they haven't heard of you, your click-through rates are going to be trash, my friend. But then it starts to feel really unwieldy when then the remit is like, well, then I've got to spend on awareness generating media. And it's like, well, that's scary. I love like the top of funnel, middle funnel, bottom funnel. Yeah, I know. But the funnel, the consumer path to purchase is no longer linear. And I know people are like smarter people than me are trying to figure out like, is it a circle? Is it a line? I'm like, I don't know. We're going to use the funnel analogy we'll ride that until the wheels fall off, probably. But the notion that channels occupy multiple points in the funnel. And like you mentioned, like I heard about it on a podcast. That's great. But if you're spending, I mean, some of our brands spend upwards of like well into 7 figures a month on podcasts. So it's like, if you're spending that much, I heard about it on a podcast is nice and that helps, but it's not specific enough to be actionable. If you're really investing in a channel that's sending a lot of dark funnel signals, right? And you're trying to confidently plan and scale spend there. What are some of the ways that you see marketers bringing structure to those channels and specificity to those channels that you're like, oh, I wish more marketers would do it this way?
Yeah. So it's podcasts, it's influencers, it's arguably TV. So we at Fairing, we think of attribution survey data as a concatenated pair. So you have channel first, and we've done a ton of research with some external panels about this last summer with a kind of third-party methodologist. And the conclusion that we came to is, yes, consumers think channel first. They don't think like Kim Kardashian first. They think Instagram, and then they think Kim Kardashian. That's like the process. So with that said, let's say in podcasts, if you're trying to get more granular information, which we would obviously recommend because you're going to have different types of, certain podcasts are going to perform very well versus others. We recommend following up on the podcast response with another question immediately after, again, because we already have the consumer's attention. There's very low drop off with a question like, hey, can you share which podcast? What you'll start to understand in this world is like the follow-up questions for podcasts and YouTube, actually, the output looks pretty similar. Like there's a lot of simulcast happening. We just ran a study a couple months ago that we're publishing soon where there's a few podcasts where like 90% of their conversion volume is coming from YouTube, not podcasts. So there's some really interesting learnings there when you start to drill down with the consumer. And since we have the consumer's attention, our customers always ask if we're in a post-purchase aspect, not like an onboarding flow or something. It's always like, how many questions do I ask? And a lot of it's very brand. It's like, how many do you feel comfortable with? Arguably to a point where your consumer is like, okay, this is maybe enough. I just paid you and now you're asking me all these questions. But questions like, how did you hear about us? Which podcast? And then the second one to kind of drill down even more is, hey, when did you first hear about us? And have some predefined options of like within the last week, within the last month, like 6 months, a year, to understand that consideration window as well. Consideration window, really important. If your average customer is taking 6 months to convert and you're optimizing all of, let's say, your meta spend on a 7-day click, like, guess what? Like that data is probably pretty underreported, or maybe it's not being optimized and doesn't have the best feedback loop for that. So there's a lot of things that can go into that. But when it comes to attribution survey, there's how did you hear about us? We also recommend splitting it with like new versus returning users, which is an important note. And then it's asking kind of intelligent follow-ups after you're getting channel level data to drill down.
Yeah. And it's part of it also is I used to not recommend that brands ask a follow-up question and then use that data to extrapolate attribution, only because, I mean, first of all, it's still a little hard if you're not spending enough in the medium, just in terms of like how you might want to. So as recently as a few years ago, I used to recommend that brands not ask that secondary question because you weren't able to get enough information back. Also because uptake wasn't as high. And so I think when you make that upfront question as easy as possible, as succinct as possible, because I do think there's like this tendency with brands sometimes to be like, let's add every single channel that we may or may not ever use to the mix for like post-purchase attribution. And it's like, well, are you really going to be handing out flyers in Times Square? Are you really going to do out of home in the next 12 months? I'm curious if like, I do like a baseline removal. Don't get me wrong. I want to add something to the survey a few months or even longer before I know that I'm going to be running a test in the channel, because even though somebody may have never seen you on YouTube because you've never done a YouTube like integration in your life, all of a sudden 2% of our customers think they heard about us on YouTube. And you're like, okay, well, there's my baseline for removal. But do you find that there is an upper limit to complexity on the front end where you might like, where you see brands trying to do something or shoehorn something in and you're just like, no, my friend, don't add 20 choices? Are there common mistakes that you just see and you're like, either you're not going to do anything with that data, so don't do it, or just you're going to shoot yourself in the foot from like a response rate perspective or an actionable perspective?
Yeah. So there's a ton. It's unfortunately more brand specific than I would like it to be. Yeah. With like channel wording and things like that based on the audience. And yeah, channel wording, we close deals, a lot of them outside of the whole Shopify e-com space, because marketers come to us for channel wording, which is like a funny entry point into this because it is complicated and it's like a longer term problem that we're trying to solve. But issues like some interesting facts. Number of response options don't really materially affect the completion rate. Surprising. You would think less options. I think maybe at the really small scale of like maybe if you had 2 or 3 responses, you might be able to really see a dramatic effect. But we just ran a study. It was 10 responses versus 17 for a brand that does about 500,000 orders a month. No material difference in response rate. So the important thing to note though is the extrapolation. So let's say you're getting a 35% or 40% response rate. So hopefully it's around there. It's like kind of like the floor for extrapolation. You need a higher response rate to extrapolate to the unresponders in an accurate manner if you have more options. So that is the core reason if you're extrapolating this data, which everybody does and should, the more response options you have makes that a little bit messier. So you just need to get more responses. So that's the core reason why not having a ton of options is important. That's usually like the first question we get asked. The wording is usually like the other. Like a lot of marketers, funny enough, think like marketers, they'll write out of home and like the consumer's like, I don't know what this is, or direct mail. Yeah. Like what is direct mail? It's like, is that in my email inbox? So you're trying to match obviously the wording, the consumer, like all we're trying to do is match what pops into the consumer's brain when they see this question as quick as possible. So you want to make sure that you're framing channels into the right wording. So those are probably the two immediate things that stand out. Wording attribution surveys, like there's not too much variance in them where people are making huge mistakes in the wording of those questions. As you start asking other questions, you can get very much into the leading question world and there's way more room for error there. But I will say at least the question itself, there's not too much variance in it. Another data point is like, how did you hear about us versus how did you first hear about us? No material difference. We've A/B tested it. So there's not a huge difference. So there's some things that I think some people lean on as like the correct way, but there's definitely not as much as a one size fits all, but a lot of these things can be simplified arguably. Like, I think that's kind of what I'm getting at. It's like, don't overcomplicate it. Think like your consumer, try to capture this data as the best way possible.
Yeah. And like I've said earlier, we could talk for hours, but one idea that's gaining traction is the notion of collective intelligence and like brands learning from each other to improve attribution, their marketing period. What do you find that looks like in process, or what do you find that looks like in practice? I mean, sharing is caring, but how do you think marketers can benefit from shared insights without losing what makes their business unique? What do you think marketers in different categories can learn from each other when it comes to the topic of marketing attribution?
Yeah. Benchmark data is obviously the first thing to lean on. Like we were mentioning LLMs before, like I forget what the percentage was, but a small percentage of conversions are last click, like attributed to ChatGPT, let's say. So your brand, you might have zero exposure into that, but hey, these benchmarks are showing, this kind of aggregated data is showing that some brands are getting some really positive results with these LLMs driving traffic. So that's definitely the easiest way to do this. Like what we're doing at Fairing is, so we've served a little over 500 million of these at this point. What we're trying to get to a place is how do we ask these questions in a very intelligent, probabilistic way to give the marketer better, more accurate data that is as analogous to a pixel firing as possible. So that's not something a marketer can do today, but since we're seeing all of these across so many brands, it's to the point of how do we normalize this and how do we know, hey, we should ask Krystina a little bit maybe different worded, or show these channels to Krystina and show these channels to Matt, because we know we're going to get a much more accurate, reliable result. So those are the things that we're working on, which is more exciting of like, okay, how do we use this aggregate data to do that? But I do think the one thing I'm always surprised by is you said sharing is caring. Like marketers are very willing to share. I know one marketer who's a really good friend of mine who scaled a DTC brand to 9 figures in revenue, who would never go on a panel, never share anything because he did not want to give away any tactic. And I think he is very rare. I think most marketers are open to collaborate, to share. And at the end of the day, it's like execution. It's not, maybe an idea is going to help you a little bit, but it's how you execute everything together is what really drives growth.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting that it also is like geographic to an extent or category driven to an extent. I've connected people who work in CBD to each other, and they run very competitive businesses. I mean, probably because it's CBD, but they're like, yeah, man, I don't know. I really want to trade notes. Like if we all build up and we work together, like the whole category can increase. And I'm just like, you bless you. I love that. And then but honestly, coming from New York, where I worked at like cutthroat agency scene, going and moving and living in the Bay Area for 5 years, I have never just gotten coffee and traded notes with more people who do what I do. And I do think some of that ethos permeates startup culture, where it's like, I don't know, but I have a friend who works there that you should probably talk to. And I find myself making a lot of those connections for people, especially like the more and more ingrained and like in-house marketing I have become, even more on the consulting side. Like I just find, and frankly, part of the reason we wanted to start the show is there's so much we can learn from each other. Some of the smartest people I've ever worked with would rather die than do an interview like this. Like it is not like I can't get, there's someone, I don't think he listens to the show, but if he does, I still want to get you on the show. He's turned me down like 3 times. And I'm like, but you're brilliant. And he's a CMO now. And he was my boss. He was, I think, a VP of marketing. And he's like, not me. I want to highlight somebody on the team. I don't want to be a public persona, but I love when I hear about marketers like connecting one-on-one. And like part of the reason we wanted to start the show is like to make conversations like this one more accessible to people who don't have as much of a network as some of us who have been doing this for like 10, 15, 20 years. And on that note, I have one more question for you. Ask this of everybody who I interview, but we hear the term growth hack all the time. You go back to your time earlier on in e-commerce where, yeah, you could hack channels and there were growth hacks that were really legitimate. And there's still some growth hacks. But what I want to know is, what is your favorite growth non-hack? What do you need in order to grow and be successful as a company that you can't hack your way to?
Yeah, I think the one thing that we've implemented at Fairing that is actually from more like the measurement space, I'm actually not sure where it's originated, but is this concept of a learning agenda. So when you're running experiments, you're trying to understand what you want to learn. And one thing that we've implemented internally here is shared documentation around what we're all collectively trying to learn at Fairing. And one of the issues we were solving here was one of our AEs will get on a call and learn something interesting about Google Tag Manager. It's, how does he know to then communicate that to our PM? How do we be proactive? In a perfect world, I think this is relevant. Let me share this. And as we're diving deep into this more like operational cadence, and again, there's a lot of this, we don't use it as much, but it's definitely been said very often in like the incrementality measurement space. It's like, what are we trying to learn with these experiments? As a marketer, like looking back at my time at Master and Dynamic, I was like very blessed with the ability to learn so much. And we were doing a lot of that learning with consultants and agencies. We're kind of augmenting the team, but it was always in the guise of like, okay, we're going to work with them for 3 months and we're going to essentially grab all their knowledge and then we can execute better after the fact. And I think that from like a growth hack perspective, it is, how do you formulate the problems that you don't have solutions for yet? How do you operationalize learning those things? I was going to say this before. It's like, how do you increase the amount of coffee that you get with people in New York? And you obviously you want to be aggressive with this, but it's like, well, if you have all these things you want to learn, then you can back into the people that maybe can grab coffee with you and share, versus like just creating a list of people that you think would be interesting to grab coffee. So it's starting to put the problem ahead of it. And that's something that we've implemented recently that has been really helpful, is this continuous, I could say like continuous learning, but that seems like such it's like a cop out. How do you operationalize that? And that's how we're operationalizing it, is like, we're actually starting with the questions, not necessarily the learnings, which has been really productive.
Yeah. And it's one thing that I think about all the time is, why are we testing something, or why are we trying to learn? Like, what are we trying to do by testing whatever we're testing, whatever variable we're testing, whether it's directly related to channel management, whether it's a process change, whatever it might be. Like for me, the only failed test is one where you don't learn anything. The outcome of the test might very well be, don't ever do that again. And it's like, okay, that's super valuable data.
Yeah, it's super valuable.
Thank you very much. I will never do that again.
Yeah.
I appreciate the definitive yes or no. And it's like just looking at it looking at testing in general through the lens of like a learning agenda, especially. I kind of like that framework, because it can feel very high stakes to test sometimes.
And think about it on like supply chain, like other parts of your business that like endlessly you go right to solution. How do we get this number up? And I think the process can be applied everywhere, like from leadership all the way down to supply chain, marketing, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah. I keep saying we could go on. I will end this here. I will thank you for all of the time you've given us today. This has been awesome.
Yeah. Thanks so much. This is always fun.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Growth Talks. We hope you found our discussion insightful and fun. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more valuable content. And if you're excited and ready to start up-leveling your growth strategies and execution, Right Side Up has you covered. Right Side Up is a leading growth marketing agency that has partnered with over 1,000 companies of all stages and sizes to help them meet and exceed their growth goals. With expertise across all growth marketing functions, we can help you evaluate product market fit, develop customer acquisition strategies, navigate executional challenges and staffing gaps, and make pivotal decisions with confidence. And whether you need one individual or a custom-built, full-service team, we'll find you the right A+ talent. Visit us at rightsideup.com to see how we can help you and your company grow.